Hello and welcome to ProLab Studios. My name is Michael Gallion. I am the Business Development Director here at Bird Barrier, and today we are going to talk about how and why birds become a pest. So we have to start at the very beginning. We did a podcast earlier that was called What is a Pest Bird? So understanding what exactly a pest bird is a bird that has become a problem for humans. I'll put it in the most abbreviated way, but whether or not people are motivated to solve it or not is really what truly defines whether or not you should even bother to address the issue. But establishing that we have birds that are pests, the question is, why do these birds become a pest? How does that happen? So that we can understand how to solve these problems more effectively. So the first thing in the stage of a bird becoming a pest has to do with what we call draw. What is the draw of the human situation, whether it's living at a home, working in a small commercial property, working at a big industrial complex? And what does that structure have that attracts pests in general? But specifically, we want to focus in then what are the unique traits of that structure that are drawing birds in to that facility as well. Usually the very same things that draw most pests will also draw birds to a certain extent. Of course, food, right? Food is one of the biggest draws. We go to a fast food restaurant anywhere around the world, and you almost always are going to see birds that are taking advantage of the fact that humans are so sloppy. As a matter of fact, one thing that separates humans from all other creatures on this planet is our wasteful tendency, especially in America and in the modern developed world. We are ridiculous when it comes to being messy, not eating all of our food, leaving scraps behind. No other creatures on this planet will leave food because it's such a valuable resource for their survival, and they don't have the ability to just generate massive amounts of food. So there's a food draw that usually always comes into play when it comes to the restaurant situation with birds. That's the draw almost all the time. One of the bigger draws that's overlooked is water. And for birds, there are often water sources up on the roof of buildings. It has to do with leaky HVAC systems, where the air handler systems, especially the AC, that generates condensation. The condensation should be routed into the regular drainage, and oftentimes that's not the case. You'll have leaks, you'll have puddles on the roof. That is a valuable thing for birds, especially in the warmer climates, the drier areas of like the southwest United States here, where we are in California, but in Arizona and of course Nevada, you're going to see birds that will make their whole living on the fact that there's water source that's regular, is generated from the air conditioning systems of the rooftops. So a lot of people overlook this. Another thing that happens then is beyond the draw of either food or water is the harborage, as with any other pest. In other words, their ability to live in the structure. So it all starts with the draw. There's something that is appealing to the birds as they are born, especially what we call invasive species like pigeons. Pigeons are the most common pest bird and they're probably the most profitable for you to work at in terms of modern bird control. Pigeons will then, have offspring that are generated at a structure, and these offspring will only know that situation, and they become very much adaptive to whatever that structure is. The draw, whether it's food or water that's brought them there in the first place. The parents will show them as they fledge and have to find food for their own. They just follow their parents. They do the same pattern. If there's a leaky roof situation with water, across the street from a fast food restaurant, and then there's some kind of structure on the roof where they can nest comfortably out of the elements with overhead protection. Basically, they've got everything they need for themselves and future generations for years unless humans intervene into that situation. So the draw is really important. Now that we have this draw established, we understand that the bird is coming to this structure on a regular basis, and more than likely their droppings are affecting the operation in some way. They are now defined as a pest potential at this point. They could become a pest bird in terms of the human interaction, but not necessarily. This sort of behavior that I just described will go on without issue, and humans will not have a need to interfere and interrupt that cycle of reproduction that pest birds will have at a particular facility, or what I would call resident birds. They've taken up. The birds are now a resident of that structure because of the biological draw, the fact that they're at that structure and can reproduce for future generations. So when a human decides that this is a problem, they want it solved, now we're talking about a pest bird for sure. It more than likely is a resident bird. And the question is now, how do they really do this? How do the birds really transition and become a pest bird? What is going on with them biologically? So there's a little bit of science we're going to talk about today that will help you understand that part of the process as well. In the early stages, when a building is fresh and brand new, newly constructed, and there's zero bird activity, right? The only bird activity that's existing is birds are flying in the open sky. And at a certain point, some of the birds in the area start to explore possibilities of where they can become residents. Trees offer good opportunity, but buildings are better. They're a lot more durable. They often will provide a lot better protection from the elements. Some of the cavities that are left open in structures like I-beam structures and recessed areas of buildings, really, they're a lot more durable. And depending on the gap size, if that gap or whatever that structure is perfectly suited for the height of the bird, then that makes it even more ideal, because if it fits perfectly for that bird, larger predator birds are not able to get into those gaps as easily. So it's sort of like a screening mechanism that will trigger the bird to say, okay, this is the place. I've found my place, and now what I'm going to do is see if I can effectively reproduce in this area. So as soon as the bird starts to repeat its pattern and come into the structure on a regular basis, you'll start to see concentration of droppings, 2, 3, 4, 20, so on, of droppings that are falling in generally the same spot. There's your first warning sign that birds are in your area and they're either already become residents or transitioning to become a resident bird. And in those droppings and on the structures above, wherever they're going, they have left behind markings, pheromones, and what we call an imprint that's unique to that bird, so that it has started to mark its own territory. Not really territory from other birds, but usually territory of birds of the same species that are in the area that are all thinking about using this facility to make its existence and its survival surrounding that structure and becoming a resident bird. Once these imprints are in place, you're starting to transition into a point where the birds are going to be difficult to solve. And here's the biggest key about when a bird becomes a pest, how it becomes a resident bird. It has to do with reproduction. So right next to me here in the studio, I've got my mock-up here, and you see this bird. The birds are designed. There's a lot of redundancy in nature with doubles. You know, human survival depends. We have 2 kidneys, we have 2 lungs, we have a lot of redundancy. So the eggs are almost always in pairs at the minimum. Rarely will there be a bird that just lays one egg as part of its whole clutch. And that's in case one fails. They definitely are doing the same physical motions to incubate the eggs, and it's a very efficient way. But once these eggs are hatched in that particular spot and they're allowed to come to full fruition, the birds fledge those offspring. This site has become very locked in. If the birds fledge, the offspring fledge, then this bird is now transitioned to what we call a resident bird, and it's become a pest. This is how it happens right there. This is the key to most of the problems that we see when it comes to birds, is understanding that nesting is so critical. It's such a critical part. That process right there, once a bird has done this behavior that I just described, now you have a much more difficult problem to solve. This is why things like bird spikes and other what we call medium pressure deterrents will fail. People will just think, oh, I want to get rid of these birds, so they remove the nest and then they'll put in a device like bird spikes into this area, and that will fail. Birds are adaptive. Once they've imprinted a spot, they're going to want to reclaim that spot at all costs. If you do not put up something that's a strong enough deterrent, they will incorporate that deterrent into their nest. And that's why we see sometimes birds will nest right in bird spikes. The imprint is powerful. Understanding the biology now of how they have marked the area, they've imprinted it, we have to then go in and use something that's at least more powerful than the biological draw that the bird has naturally to reclaim that spot. That's basically it. We can apply this to gulls, we can apply it to swallows, sparrows, all kinds of birds, whether they're invasive species or not. This is how a bird becomes a pest. This is at the very beginning. Now, one other thing I will mention is that there are spots where birds become a pest, and they become what we call resident birds, but they have not nested. And in that case, those are much more easily solved. So it doesn't mean that there has to be nesting for a bird to be a pest and be a resident bird. But if they have nested, that's the highest pressure, the most difficult to solve. With the areas where birds are just using it for a staging area, they're coming there for food, but they're nesting somewhere else, those can be solved as well by using proper deterrents. So that's it. That's the basics of how a bird becomes a pest, how it transitions in a biological way. And hopefully you found this helpful. Understanding that science is going to make you much better at modern bird control. Again, my name is Michael Gallion. I do business development for Bird Barrier, and I will see you at the next podcast.